ask David if he has any other comments from a city perspective on looking at building infrastructure, both the existing buildings and any of the future buildings as well.
Thank you. And on behalf of the City of New York, it's an honor to be here and talk about electric vehicles as part of our larger strategy for a greener and greater New York. With regard to our findings so far with regard to electric vehicles, you'll find some echoes of what earlier panelists talked about, and then some major differences. As with any new product or new market, the first step is really to assess what the possibilities are. In 2009, the City of New York commissioned with McKinsey & Company a market assessment to identify who were the likely adopters of electric vehicles, what they would be looking for in terms of infrastructure, what their motivations were, and then also to help to conclude what the city should do to help facilitate that. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, the answer came back that public infrastructure was not first and foremost the greatest need in the context of New York City, at least not over the next 3 to 5 years. In fact, the findings were that in some senses the demand for electric vehicles would outstrip the supply, and that the goal initially was to be able to provide information to connect those potential buyers with the supply and to provide very targeted infrastructure investments to make it useful for them. New York is different than most other American cities in several different respects that have implications for the types of facilities needed for electric vehicles. New York City's automobile ownership is much lower than most other cities. It's about half of the national average. Also, the way people use automobiles is somewhat different in New York City. The number of people who go from point A to point B on a regular basis, and leaving their car in a particular place is also not like the national average. And when they at home, where people leave their cars often varies in New York City, in contrast to other places where people have a place at home to park their car in the same place every night of the year. Often New Yorkers will park on the street or in a third-party garage, in a public, not publicly owned, but privately owned, open to the public garage. So all of those have implications for where the power sources need to be. The study is available at the back of the room near the door, and we have a supply if you'd like to pick up one. But let me summarize some of the results. I've mentioned some of them. One is that by 2015, between 14 and 16% of the new vehicles purchased by New Yorkers could potentially be electric vehicles. But because the capacity for mass production doesn't exist to that scale, probably that demand would be smaller than the supply. The attitudes on the part of the public about technology and also the environment, and when we heard some of this in some of the earlier presentations about what are the attitudes that drive people, it is that people who want to be leaders, who want to be innovative, and who want their choices as consumers to reflect environmental values, all of those things show up in this study just as they did in the earlier one that we saw. So the City of New York concluded that the first priority for municipal action, for what a city government in the City of New York could do, would be to unlock that demand in the targeted demographics and geographic areas and alleviate some of the choke points that were preventing those connections between those market and the supply. The first was just that information that only 30% of New York City residents know about the specific benefits and limitations about electric vehicles. They may have a general sentiment in favor of it. They may have a good impression of it. They don't necessarily know the details. And the more they know, the more they get connected to what the marketplace is. Second thing that's an obstacle is the complications for people who want to install charging at home. Because home means different things to different people. It could be a personal garage, could be a driveway, could be a commercial garage, or more complex, it could be the street. So more research into those infrastructure needs that was needed. So going forward, we're continuing to assess those. The city has received, along with Philadelphia and Boston, a grant, a foundation grant. We have somebody on staff now working on the Northeast Regional Electric Vehicle Partnership to promote electric vehicle adoption. One of those in our city will be to coordinate between the privately owned, investor-owned utility, Consolidated Edison, the manufacturers, our Department of Buildings that permits, issues the permits for installation of charging, other city agencies such as parking garage owners and so on, to create some standards and create some sense of what the market needs to be, and do a consumer education program. We've also been piloting the installation of some charge points in those large commercial garages and certain public parking areas, again, where it makes sense, where it's driven by the market data. The city fleets are part of that. That's having the city lead the way in the management of its own fleet. And then finally, we're also piloting a program with Better Place to install a battery switching system and public education station that would be used potentially by taxis that would be able to pull in, swap out battery, and get back to work very quickly. And we're also working with the utility funding agencies to help make that happen. So that's a brief report, and again, the written report is available by the door. Thank you.